Hi, Heritage. Hi. Oh, man, it's so good to be with you today. Thanks, like 32 guys came to men's breakfast yesterday. So much fun. We'll do it again. Really appreciate when you lean in when we do stuff and you come. Great things happen, and God does great things in our relationships. So stay tuned on the things that are coming up. Exciting series. We just hit an anniversary, not we, but like mankind, just a few months ago. 50 years ago was the most recent time in human history when a man walked on the moon. Did you know that? December 1972. Now, in my lifetime, we got all kinds of ages, all kinds of journeys represented in this room. In my lifetime, walking on the moon was kind of yesterday's news. But you have to think about it when you look at the moon in the sky and think of the centuries, all right? Centuries and centuries of people who have looked up and looked at the same moon and thought, impossible. Right? That's a joke. That's a fantasy. How in the world would one of us little engines down here get all the way up there? Like, how would we do that? And how would we survive like any moment after we got there? Like, how would it even work? It's just impossible. And yet today, you and I know we took that step, right? Neil Armstrong, 1969. Man has walked on the moon. It is the ultimate, we don't belong here, and yet here we are. It's the ultimate story of something like that. And 50 years ago, this is December 1972, was our sixth Apollo mission. It was our last Apollo mission, and that crew actually brought something back from the moon. Did you know that? They brought back some rocks. You heard me right. Rocks. They brought back some rocks from the moon. Some of them are on display. They are not pretty, but they are worth like way more than diamonds. Did you know that a moon rock is valued at over $8 million an ounce? And the reason why is not because anyone wants to drop it into their necklace. The reason why is because of the story it tells. Moon rocks do not belong on Earth. And the reason why is because we never belonged there. This has been a fun series. If you're new in the room, let me catch you up to where we are today. Joshua and Company has been all about looking at the things that God does and can do through the lens of the life of a man named Joshua in the Old Testament. This is early in the Bible. God picked a people for himself to uniquely carry the message of redemption to the entire earth. That God loves people. He saves people. And this nation, this group that he picked, is the people of Israel. He grew that nation out of a single couple, a single, extremely old, way past birthing years couple. He gave them a child, 2 went to 3. It was one of the first of like a litany of miracles that would mark the journey of the people of God. And God grew this nation generation after generation, even when you get from the book of Genesis to the book of Exodus, while they are living under the boot of an oppressive nation, the Egyptian empire, they are slaves to them for multiple centuries. God continued to grow them. And then when God was ready, he plucked them out of bondage. He brought them to a new life, a new land that he gifted them. It was the likes of a land they had never experienced or witnessed before. And we've been following those travels of Joshua. Here's what we saw in Joshua chapter 3 last week. I got to talk about last week in order to talk about this week. In Joshua chapter 3, the moment had finally arrived. After centuries and centuries of looking from afar, going, no way, impossible. After a few decades of like wishing and guarding their hearts, the day finally had come. God told the Israelites, I'm ready. I want you to go. Take your first real, live steps into the land that I have promised you, the promised land. And he leads them to it. There's just one problem. There's a pretty big obstacle separating them from their new life. It's the Jordan River. They have to cross. And not only is there a river there, but it's at flood stage at the time of year where the people of Israel are standing, and the water is muddy and the water is murky. You remember this from last week. It's raging. It's torrential. It would be perilous to try to wade across or swim across. We got babies and kids. We got livestock. We got this whole thing we're trying to get over there. We don't have what it takes to survive this. This is impossible. What God has led us to is impossible. But I want you to know something. That God does some of his finest work in the flood seasons of our lives. And when the needs are great and the risks are high and when all the odds are against you and you don't feel brave, you just feel exhausted, you just feel anxious, those are the times where we think this might be the absolute worst time to just do what God is telling me to do. But these are the best times. These are the perfect seasons. Flood seasons are the perfect time for God to make very clear who is almighty in your life and who ain't. And I'm the ain't. And God is the almighty. And so this is what we saw last week. Joshua chapter 3. If you got a Bible, I encourage you to open it up. See this for yourself. Remind yourself. Joshua chapter 3, we watched God lead them right up to an impossible situation. He did that. Sometimes we think impossible situations are mistakes in our lives. There are times where God will bring us right to us so that we can sort of take account again. Who we follow, who we need. He brings them to an impossible situation to prove to them afresh that without God, all bets are off. But with God, anything is possible. You remember this? He instructed them to be led by the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant. They were to go first across. We spoke about this in detail, that for the people of Israel, this was symbolically and literally them being led by the presence of their God, of our God. God sends them in first, and as the priests walk to the river's edge, the Bible says the water just went away. It's nuts. It's crazy. The water just went away. The Bible says the water stopped flowing from where it was coming from, 16 miles up the river. The water that was flowing right in front of them just kind of moved on through. The water that was making the riverbed mud somehow just went down into the ground or it evaporated. They walked across on dry ground. It was like every water droplet that lay before them saw the creator of the universe coming and just found a place to hide. And I want you to know that that's true for the obstacles in your life whenever God says, hey, you're in our way. That there's no obstacle in your life that is too great if God says, you got to go. I also want to give you something to trust, is that if there's something in your life that you've been viewing as an obstacle and God doesn't move it, you can rest assured that that wasn't your obstacle. If God doesn't move an obstacle for you, it's never because he couldn't, because he's God. And his promises to us will stand firm that one, nothing is impossible with him, and two, he will never leave you or forsake you. Which means that if an obstacle remains, doesn't matter if it's disease, if it's some kind of disability, if it's unemployment, if whatever, today, that is not your obstacle. God is leaving it there for one of his reasons, probably because he wants it to be part of your story rather than be in your past. God can do that. Because when you're with God, there is no such thing as an obstacle on the path that he's leading you down. When you are with God, there's no such thing as an obstacle if that is the path that God is leading you down. If he leaves it, he's got something else to figure out. And we just have to stay close to him. So for the people of Israel, we've got this wow moment in Joshua 3. And it brings us to today. It brings us to Joshua 4. So Joshua 3, the miracle, leads us to first verse in Joshua 4. Check it out. When all the people had crossed the Jordan River, they crossed over, the Lord said, Joshua, choose 12 men, one from each tribe. There's 12 tribes in the people of Israel. One man from each tribe, and tell them, take 12 stones from the very place where the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan. You heard him right. Rocks. I want you to carry them out. I want you to pile them up at the place where you will camp tonight. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had chosen, one from each of the tribes of Israel. And he told them, go to the middle of the Jordan in front of the ark of the Lord your God. Each of you must pick up one stone and carry it out on your shoulder. That's 12 stones in all, one for each of the tribes of Israel. Now, let's live in the picture here, okay? Not one, but two unthinkable miracles have just occurred. Firstly, a river jumped out of their way. And secondly, the riverbed was completely dry. Every man, woman, child, animal is going to walk across sure-footed. Not a wagon wheel is going to get stuck today in the mud, nothing like that. 3.5 million estimate crosses over. So you've seen that. Now they're moving. A lot of them are on the other side. They've taken their first step on the moon. The priests are still in the middle. The presence of God is still creating the way for them to go. And then Joshua directs one man from each tribe. And I'm assuming it's like not one of the stamp collectors, like whoever ate their Wheaties, right? I want you to go back and pick up a stone that's big enough and you're going to put it on your shoulder. He sends them back in, right back to where the priests are standing. And pick up a rock. And I want you to bring it with you. And the big question is why? Look at verse 6 with me. Joshua said, we will use these stones to build a memorial. And in the future, your children are going to ask you, what do these stones mean? In Hebrew, they would say this, masevot. Literally means, what happened here? What is this? What do these stones mean? Your kids are going to ask you, and you can tell them they're here to remind us that the Jordan River stopped flowing when the Ark of the Lord's covenant went across. And these stones will stand as a memorial among the people of Israel forever. Scholars tell us that piling up stones was basically a covenant ritual in the ancient Near East. Back then, we didn't do steel statues. We didn't do, engraved, historical society plaques. We didn't have millennium parks and things like this. So it seems kind of crude and nondescript to just pile up a bunch of rocks. But back then, it was common. It was noticeable. It was a method of preserving the memory of important events. And we see this all across the Bible as well. And so Joshua 4 tells us, as you continue to read on, you see this in the verses ahead. This is what they do. They actually most likely constructed two memorials, one pile of 12 stones right there in their brand new land, and then another pile of 12 stones right there in the middle of the riverbed. And I got to tell you, just thinking about today, thinking about you, reading through this, I have come to love these rocks. I love the story that they tell. I mean, you ever walk around in nature, you unearth something in the little middle of a creek or something like that, you pick up something and you think to yourself, I wonder if I'm the first set of human hands to ever touch this thing. Like, have you ever done that? Here they are, picking up rocks that should have never seen the light of day. Rocks that should have stayed stuck in the mud forever. And they get pulled out. They get put in a new land. They're like rocks from another planet. And you can't look at you can't look at a moon rock and go, oh, how did you get here? Like, you know somebody did something. It wasn't him. It wasn't it. Somebody acted outside of this rock's ability and put them where they ought not be. Like in a promised land, here's these stones, and they're going to stand and they're going to tell a story. They're going to give a sacred reminder that the God of the universe loves people, and he unstucks people from where they were stuck. He takes them from the dirt and makes them clean. He takes them from dark places and he brings them into light. Our God is an amazing God. He does things like this for people. And so this is what they do, and they position these rocks. And then close to the end of the chapter, I'll show you verse 21. It takes us to the end. It says, Joshua said to the Israelites, he kind of proclaims this. He says, in the future, your children will ask, what do these stones mean? And then you can tell them, this is a spot. These rocks are evidence. Like, this is where the Israelites crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the river right before your eyes, did he not? And he kept it dry until you were all across. Just as he did at the Red Sea when he dried it up until we had all crossed over. Joshua and another guy, Caleb, were the only two people who say they were eyewitnesses to this, that when they were slaves and the Pharaoh was after them and they were against the Red Sea, God used Moses to part the Red Sea. They walked across on dry ground. And Joshua said, it was kind of like that. I was there. He did it for us before. He's done it again. This is the God that we follow, and you ought not forget this. He did this so that all the nations of the earth might know that the Lord's hand is powerful, and so you might fear the Lord your God forever. Now, this is a really cool story. But as you know, in places like these, we always we get as much information as we can so that we can start living a life of as much transformation as we can. What's the message here for us? I think there's a really important word here that gives us a responsibility. We who follow God, we who are on a new path, whether you've just begun, you're on this path for decades, we've got a responsibility. We are to reflect and remember and share who God is and what God did. You see that? That's the power that we have. And with great power comes great responsibility. Thank you, Spider-Man. We have a responsibility to reflect, remember, and share who God is and what God did. That's our job. It's been convicting for me this week. Why is it our job to do this? To think deeply and reflect about what God has done in our lives, to actively remember it, and to make sure that word gets out, who God is, what he did, what he does. I want to give you 3 reasons to kind of really punch this responsibility that we have out, so we kind of get our head around it. I'll give you 3 reasons, and they all come from the text. The first one is this, is because we tend to forget, and we ought not forget. Multiple times God called the people Israel out on their tendency to forget, because they're human beings, so we are people, we're forgetters, right? Like, and this has always been our deal. Even like when we were kids, we pouted like our parents had never done anything good for us on December 26th. Like, we forget. Good things happen. Life just keeps moving. Like, we forget. We're people. We forget to pay our bills. We forget to put the trash cans out. We forget the assignments that were due. We forget anniversary dates. We forget the name of the church person that we just met 20 minutes ago. Like, we are people who forget. So multiple times, God calls them out, and he tells them the bad things that happen when you forget God. I'll just show you one of them, all right? This is in Deuteronomy 6. This is the pathway leading up to the Jordan River. He's gearing them up to be a new nation and a new land, and they're just not there yet. And in Deuteronomy 6, he says, the Lord your God will soon bring you into the land he swore to give you when he made a vow to your ancestors, Abraham, old guy, Abraham, Sarah, Abraham, and then Isaac, and then Jacob, and then and the land he's going to give you, it's got large, prosperous cities. It's all put together, and you didn't build them. Houses will be richly stocked with goods that you did not produce. You will draw water from cisterns you did not dig. You will eat from vineyards and olive trees you did not plant. And when you have eaten your fill in this land, be careful not to forget the Lord. Be careful to not forget the Lord who rescued you from slavery in the land of Egypt. You must fear the Lord your God and serve him. He says, be careful not to forget. We tend to forget. He said, it's coming for you. You're going to enjoy trees and vineyards you didn't plant. You're going to enjoy wells that cisterns you didn't have to dig, cities you didn't build. You're going to forget. I had the pagans get all that ready for you. And then I just handed it to you. No matter how awesome something is, the further we move away from it, we just tend to forget. And you may forget a lot of things in your life. But God is not the one that you want to forget, right? We have long nights of the soul, seasons of brokenness. We find ourselves where the tears come quick. We can't get people to help us in the way that we need. We feel helpless. We cry out to God. There's a beautiful desperation and a dependency that comes in seasons like that. And then God shows up. And he turns our night into morning. Somehow he allows us to survive. And it's the craziest thing, isn't it? As soon as it goes from the windshield to the rearview mirror, we move on and we forget. And we start to feel strong again. And we start to walk upright. And we get some of our swagger back. And we get a little cocky. And before you know it, we begin to behave as if we are the hero of our own story. It's a cycle that we run as human beings. As soon as it's in yesterday's news, we tend to forget. And here's what we should never forget. God is your source. God is your source. God is the one who paved the way with opportunities for you. God is the one who has given you a sound mind and made you as able-bodied as you are today. God is the one who allows you to live in a first world country today. God is the one who stopped all the bad things that could have happened to you from actually happening to you. You can trace every good thing in your life back to God who allowed it to be. Treat it as a gift. If you trace it back with a biblical lens, it will not lead you to yourself and your own cleverness. It will lead you to a God who is kind and available. God is your source. And you know what the great thing is about God being your source? Nobody can own you. Nobody can own you when God is your source. So God is saying, look, I am your source. This is what I'm doing. But be careful not to forget. That's our job. When you're in the new land of yours, when you're living a new life of yours, never forget, I don't belong here. I didn't do it by myself. I couldn't have done it by myself. Because what happened is God moved me. And through things like surrender, things like faith that turned into obedience, I put myself in a position, and God, well, he did all the rest. So why should we remember and reflect and share who God is, what God did? Well, one is because we tend to forget, and we ought not forget. Here's a second really good reason why we need to reflect, remember, share who God is, what he did. It's because our kids need to know. Verse 21 says, in the future, your children will ask. In the future, your children will ask. Joshua says, those little hands that you led, who couldn't comprehend 100th of the wonder of what you were seeing, they're going to ask. Children who are going to be born on the other side of the Jordan River and didn't live through the moment that you lived through, they're going to ask. This is what happens with kids. They get born, and then when they can talk, they start asking questions. And the more they grow, the more questions, the better questions they ask. And I want to add this. And then they grow to a point where they stop asking you. They get to a point where they need to hear it from anybody but you. You remember being the kid, so don't get sad about it. You took your turn, right? They are going to ask. And so how ready we are to respond determines what they learn in that window of opportunity when they're in our care. And it will help determine the trajectory that they're on after the launch. Let me show you a verse that really puts a finger on a theme throughout the entire Bible. This is Psalm 145:4. It says this, let each generation tell its children of your mighty acts. Let them proclaim your power. Can I tell you something that is all over the Bible? Is that whatever it is you believe, that's your faith. Whatever you believe that's worth acting on, that's your faith. Not the thing you talk about, the thing that you live. And the Bible says that we are to have a transferable faith. It moves from person to person. We have a responsibility. We whose hair is getting lighter. We whose skin is getting saggier. We have the increasing responsibility. It's our job to testify to what God has done to the next generation. And let me de-church the word testify. When you get called to court, all they are asking you to do is sit down and say what you saw, right? That is what makes you a witness. That is what gives you testimony. And they're not asking you to dress it up and make it sound awesome like you're running for office. And they're also not asking you to share less than. Just tell what you saw. What did you experience? It's our job to testify what God has done. And when it comes to matters of faith in the living God, our kids ought to be able to depend on us. Like we are walking slogans for Farmers Insurance. Hey, we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two, right? It is the job of the Baldies to put their arm around the hoodies and say what they've seen, what they've experienced. Why? Because the next generation never got to see what you saw. And they never got to see what you saw just the way you did. And if there's anything in you that believes that leading them, pointing them straight to Jesus, and try him the first time rather than on the 10th pass is better, then we realize you and I have something to say about that. We have a role to play. We are to have a transferable faith. And yet the reason, it is not hard for me to believe, how about you? Not hard for me to believe that the reason we have so much chaos in our world today, one of the reasons why is because we have had a transfer problem. And why our cities are in such a mess, why we are America in God we don't much trust. Why we are experiencing so much racial turmoil, political turmoil, moral turmoil, cultural turmoil is because a large part of a generation didn't receive the faith of the generation that came before them. And the reason they didn't receive it is because it wasn't given to them. It wasn't intentionally handed off. And this is what the Bible will not just say, but show us. This is how a culture, any culture, disintegrates. How it goes away. If you want to see it in the Bible, finish reading the book of Joshua and then just keep going to the book of Judges. Culture disintegrated because the moms and the dads were not intentional about handing their faith off to the next generation, and it breeds absolute chaos. Be careful not to forget means that as we remind ourselves, we teach somebody who's younger than us. Somebody who's like biologically younger than us. Somebody who maybe is biologically older than us, but they're younger in the faith that we are both walking together. As we remind ourselves, we teach other people. Can I tell you who this is on? This is on us as parents, as aunts and uncles. This is on us as grandmas and grandpas. This is on us with our kiddos. We are to live out a faith that is not just an idea. It's something that can be witnessed in real time. It's a faith that can be explained, where there are markers made, where there's an actual trail of breadcrumbs. Only an act of faith is going to point our kids to a living God. So parents, this is on us. Church, this is on us. This is on us to make sure that we resource Heritage Kids Ministry, which is happening downstairs right now, Heritage Youth Ministry that happens in the middle of the week, that we resource them with our prayers and our enthusiasm, that we resource them with volunteers who bring passion and excitement and real stories about faith, so that we as a church can guide the younger ones in ancient paths with relevant guardrails. It's on us as a church. We want to be the church that can take any kid in town. Double parent home, single parent home, no parent home, big home, small home, foster home. Send us the kids. And what we will do for them is we'll tell them the truth, and they'll get it in love as we stand on the eternal promises of God. It is an unignorable mandate in the Bible that we have a transferable faith, and exactly knowing who we transfer it to. I knew a guy named Bob and got to sit down and talk with him a few times. He was in youth work, man, I would say something like 40 or 50 years. You might have met a youth pastor who tends to tap out somewhere at 25 years old, 32 years old, something like that. 40 or 50 years he was in youth work, and he was passionate about it. And he had a life verse that I had never heard in the Bible before. I want to read it to you. It's kind of obscure. It's in Psalm 71. It says this: "Now that I am old and gray, do not abandon me. O God, let me proclaim your power to this next generation, so that your mighty miracles to all who come after me." You know what I call that? I call that determination to live out a transferable faith. Matters so much, right? Because this is what we know about running track. You drop the baton, you lose the race, right? So I'll give you one more reason, great reason. And then I want to share some tips, some ways to make this practical for us. I know I've said it a bunch. I'm going to say it again, just so it all sticks together. Why do we need to reflect, remember, and share who God is and what God did? Here's the third reason. It's because we're on mission. We've been put on mission. Now, this was true all the way back to Joshua. If you go back to verse 22 and how it closes out the chapter there, generally you'll see a what and a why. He says, "For the Lord your God did what? He dried up the river right before your eyes. He kept it dry until you were all across. He did something for you that you never could have done for yourself." There are people here who say, yeah, externally, internally, God is doing something in my life that I couldn't have done it. He did it. And he did this. Here's the why. Why? So all the nations of the earth might know that the Lord's hand is powerful, and so that you might fear the Lord your God forever. See, all the nations of the earth need to know that the Lord has a powerful hand. It's the most powerful hand, and his hand has been on your life in some way. All the nations need to know that fearing the Lord Doesn't mean cowering in a corner, living a scared life. It means put him first. Make him happiest first. Remember that the power he used to protect you, he can use that same power to spank you. Like, that's what it means to fear God. When you live with him at the center, story gets out. Because that's like the fast pass to an abundant life, a better life. So there's some really great reasons why, as we're following Jesus, we want to develop into people who reflect and remember and share what God did and who God is. Now, I want to speak to you really practically about what it would be like for you and I to take some steps and move in this direction and do this more next week and next year than we did last week and last year. I'll give you four tips and try to keep this fast. Here's the first one. In order to do this, tip number one, grow in gratitude. You might want to write these down. Grow in gratitude. Gratitude is the secret sauce of the spiritual life. And this is what keeps whatever you say about your faith, whatever you say about Jesus, to come from an authentic place through the lens of a parent. You guys know, most of you know, Courtney and I got 4 kids at home, and we're doing the parenting thing, and right now they're between 5 and 12, all 4 of them, and so it's not uncommon to hear that same thing over. We've never been parents that say thank you. We ask a question and then let them figure out what the answer is. But we would just say, hey, what do you say when someone does something nice for you? And that, like while they're dropping candy into the Halloween bag, right? Like while the waitress is putting a cheeseburger right in front of them, like in those moments, they just get so caught up with what they're getting. And so that's that quiet little, mom's like, hey, what do you say when someone does something nice for you? Thank you. Like that's like step one. And then step 2 has been to say thank you with your eyes and say, hey, it's even better when you look at the person when you say thank you rather than just kind of squeak it out. So it's like, thank you, it's the eyes. And the thing that we're kind of working on next is to, hey, try smiling a little bit when you say thank you. You're laughing. You see the difference though, right? It's not just words of appreciation. It's like a display of appreciation. And the other thing that's coming along is, in a land where kids aren't expected to say anything, like don't murmur it. Like say it so the whole table can hear. Because that says something too. You think that we all could probably just apply this to us and our own soul and a God who does greatly on our behalf? Growing in gratitude means whatever comes out next is going to come from a very authentic place. Say thank you a lot. And look at him with your eyes when you say thank you. And do it with a spirit of joy. Smile when you say thank you. And find ways to say thank you so that more and more people overhear you when you say thank you. So tip number 1, if we grow in gratitude, we're going to start moving in this direction. Here's tip number 2, have a response. We need to develop from people who flinch a little bit when somebody asks us a question about what we believe. Get a little squeamish when someone asks a question about Jesus, to people who are actually kind of eager for that to come up. You know what I'm saying? And look, I've walked this whole journey in my life. I know exactly how those moments feel. But let me show you what 1 Peter 3:15 says. It says, worship Christ as the Lord of your life, and if somebody asks you about your hope as a believer, always be ready to what? Explain it. Start talking with Jesus about this, about what it would be like to be a little more eager to step in whatever feels like a spotlight in that moment. I want to take some pressure off of you right now. Verses like this, encouragement, dares like this, does not mean that we will ever be able to work the math out on God for everybody about everything. You are not on the hook to always have the right answer. You're just on the hook to have a response about what you believe and why. In moments like those, people will have a question. You're like, we're out of my depth. It is okay to say, I don't know. It is okay to say, you know what, I'm going to try to chase a better answer for you than I have right now. It's okay to do that. And let me tell you why. It's because often the mystery is part of the story. That you have a faith of taking calculated risks, but also parts where God does, and you don't know how, and you don't know why. Think of the Israelites. They're over there making a rock tower. Somebody could have come along and been like, explain this. And they're like, well, I can explain we're putting rocks from the middle of the river in a pile. I can explain that we're pretty happy, gosh darn happy to be here. Well, who did it? God. Why? Because it wasn't us. Okay. Well, how did he do it? I have no idea. Isn't that awesome? Well, why do he do it? I have no idea. Why did he pick you guys? I have no idea. But I'm here to tell you the story. I know I'm in it. I know what I've seen and I know what I've experienced. Sometimes the mystery is going to be part of the story, so be eager to have a response for people who come asking. Tip number 3, don't back down. I have lived this too. It's kind of sad. You can probably relate. It's on how excited we can be on Sunday to rejoice and say, I am where I don't belong. And then on Tuesday, we feel a little ashamed that we're Christians. We feel like maybe we're not supposed to talk about that. That we're doing a favor to the people at our school or at work or online if we kind of leave those details out. I'm just telling you, I want you to know I have fought those battles as well. And I feel like most of the time, even when we think we're doing people a favor, it just comes back to us caring a little too much about what other people think about us. And can I just tell you this? A memorial that blends in is a memorial that people are going to miss. A highway sign that's in camouflage does nobody any good. There's a verse in Romans 1 that says, hey, I'm not ashamed of this gospel of Christ, the good news about Christ, because it's the power of God at work. Pretty happy to talk about it. It's the power of God at work, saving everyone who believes. What does this mean for us? It means let's be relatable in our relationships. Let's be purposeful. Let's invest in relationships. Let's honor people and recognize that we are in a place they are not yet. Let's do all that work. But let's also decide today that we're not going to flinch when we call ourselves a Christian. You don't have to be afraid to say the word Jesus. God will work out the rest. He put you there in that moment. Tell him why you do what you do. Tell him what you're learning. Tell him what you've seen and the things that he's done in you. 4th, final tip. You want to reflect well, remember well, and then share well what God did, what God does, because that's what he uses his people for. 4th tip is leave a trail. Leave a trail. Stole a picture from Instagram. It's from my friend Matt. You might know him as Pastor Matt. He's at the other campus. Came preached here a few months ago. Picture this little FedEx truck on his office desk. And he said, this truck is on my desk because my wife bought it for me, because we remember years ago when we took the biggest leap of faith that we had ever had taken before. By faith, we walked away from a paid ministry role, knowing our calling was to be in full-time ministry, but knowing that we were not in the place where God wanted us to be, and we stepped away, and we were a single-family income. And we got 2 kids at home and now no job. And he said, I picked up a part-time job at FedEx, and they treated me well. They were so good to me, knowing that God had led us into a temporary season for only reasons that he knew. And at the time of writing, he said, now I'm part of one of the greatest ministries that I've ever gotten to be a part of. And FedEx truck still sits on my desk today. Because every time I look at it, I think, Masevot, what happened here? And I can tell you of times when I couldn't see God's plan, but I could trust it. And he was doing much bigger things in my life than I could ever comprehend. This is what I want to ask you, is that if somebody walked through your life, you're going to be a person who is careful not to forget. If somebody walked through your life, would they discover the reminders of how great God has been and how great he's been to you? Would they discover the reminders because you saved a scrap, because you took a photo and you framed it, because you kept a ledger, or you wrote a journal, or you treated yourself to a knick-knack? They help us remember. God says, be careful not to forget. Objects, they can do that for us as well, like those moon rocks. I'll close with this, is that in the year following the final moon landing, 1973, the U.S. president at the time, who was Richard Nixon, he actually ordered a decree that those rocks that had been lunar rocks that had been brought back for study and for history, he made a decree that they be shared. Did you know that? Again, this is just a touch before my lifetime, but he ordered that a fragment of a rock from the moon be sent to 135 different foreign heads of state and all 50 U.S. states. It's a little piece that got put in acrylic, mounted on a plaque with their very own flag as a gift. Why? Because a discovery like this, a phenomenon like this, it's for everybody, right? They called them goodwill lunar displays. If you and I want to do something for others out of goodwill, let's remember, reflect, and share what God has done in our lives. Let's testify to the power and the grace of the living God as we live out a faith that works. That is the best gift that you can give yourself, that you can give your kids, that you can give anyone in the world, in any nation of the earth. So while you're thinking about this and you're praying about your next step, I want to call 12 guys to come up. 12 guys who know who they are, come on over here. Just as sort of an act of worship for our church. Realizing that more of us have more to say than we have often realized. We have asked that some guys would come up. They would do some moving of some rocks. And as they're coming up, I want you to know this. It's a hope. It's a prayer in our heart that as a church, we'll continue to get better and better about sharing testimony from stage. And that our lobby becomes a place where we can nerd out on what Jesus is doing in other people's lives. That we get so good at talking about that and processing that. Because it makes us stronger as a family and stronger in our mission. Guys, you got to come on up. These guys are just going to share a few lines from the mic and move some stones. I want you to enjoy who God is and what God has done.